Hello, I'm Nick Gordon. Welcome to Limelight Arts Travel's podcast, A Closer Look. Hokusai is one of Japan's best-known artists, designing many of the most striking prints in the country's woodblock tradition. His daughter, Katsushika Ōi, assisted him in the family business as 19th century women in Japan often did. Unlike many women of her generation, however, Ōi became a highly skilled and sought-after painter in her own right. In this episode, Dr. Kathleen Olive joins me to discuss one of Ōi's most accomplished surviving works, which reveals the social and artistic changes sweeping Japan in the period of the Meiji Restoration. Well, thanks for coming in today, Kathleen, to talk about this fantastic work by Katsushika Ōi.
Thanks, Nick.
Perhaps you could start by describing the work for us.
Certainly. So we don't have a date for this work, but it's a date from at least the middle of the 19th century, because that corresponds to the roughly 60 years of this artist's life. And it is a very small painting on silk that was designed to be set into a hanging scroll for display. And it shows a night scene in the Yoshiwara neighborhood of Tokyo, which was from the 17th century to the 20th century, it was one of the main licensed red light districts of the city. And it shows inside a room screened off from easy view at nighttime, a group of beautifully displayed courtesans, which is the Japanese euphemism for sex workers. They're sitting on cushions on the tatami mat with sliding screens or shoji paper screens behind some of the women. And behind some of the other women, you can just see beautifully decorated screens showing a kind of a pine tree or a cypress, perhaps. And then outside, looking in at those women, outside in almost total darkness, looking in at the women in a very well-lit space inside, is a group of onlookers, women, men, a child carrying a lantern, and the light from inside spills out through the lattice work to the outside where it's nighttime. And the nighttime scene is mostly seen entirely in darkness except for pools of light cast by paper lanterns being carried by some of the onlookers.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a beautiful and very intriguing image. Before we talk more about what's going on and what's behind in it, could you tell us a little bit more about the artist?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know her as Katsushika Ōi. Katsushika is her family name. Her father is probably the best-known Japanese artist of all time, Katsushika Hokusai. And he had a number of children. He married twice, and he had 2 sons, 4 daughters, if memory serves. And Katsushika Ōi was one of those. Ōi is not her proper name. It's her artist's name. It comes supposedly from something that her father used to call out to her in a very uncouth way in the street. When he needed her attention, he would call out, "Oi," which translates to, roughly, "Hey, you." And Katsushika Ōi took that uncouth nickname of her father's and made a very clever pun on it that essentially meant loyal to Itsu, Itsu being one of her father's many artistic names. He gave himself a different artistic name for every period of his career. So her own artistic name means both loyal to my father, but also quite literally, "Hey, you." So it gives us a sense, I think, of what kind of a woman she was. She had a turbulent personal life from what we know about her, and an accomplished artistic career.
So you mentioned you started with her being the daughter of Hokusai. Does that explain why she trained as a painter, or is there a different relationship between the two?
It's a bit of column A and column B. So it's very common for women, in all societies to help out in the family business, regardless of how patriarchal the structures of a society might be. The reality is that a family business needs workers, and women will work in the family business just as much as their male relatives will. What's a little less common is that Katsushika Ōi is officially trained. She apprentices to a dynasty of artists called the Tsutsumi dynasty. And that's a little less usual that a woman would be sent out to train in Edo period Japan in the 19th century in Japan in that way. And it seems to be because she was simply so accomplished. Her father is known to have said, for example, that he couldn't rival her production of a particular genre of paintings, which was portraits of great beauties. So maybe that's why he has her officially trained to another artist. And then while she's working under that artist, she meets one of his male apprentices and is married to him. All of her other sisters are married as well. So the idea was that they're all going to leave the family business at some point, and presumably she would have assisted her husband, who was also an artist, in his production. But that marriage doesn't work out. Apparently, Ōi is quite honest in her assessment of her husband's artistic prowess, and he objects to her characterization of his work, and she divorces him and she returns to live with her father, Hokusai, instead.
And was she active as a painter, do we know, during that period when she was married?
We don't know that. So we don't have very much information about her life at all. Most of what we know are things that other artists or acquaintances recorded her father saying about her. So he said that her artistic production excelled his in some categories, for example. And we know that she assisted him in his artistic production, but we don't know very much about that period of her marriage at all.
Good. And was it common for women to divorce in 19th century Japan, or is that exceptional in her case?
No, it's not exceptional. Japan did allow for divorce throughout the Edo period. It's much easier for a husband to divorce the wife than for a wife to divorce the husband, of course. So we assume that the husband divorces Ōi rather than the other way around.
He must have been very sensitive, perhaps, about his own artwork from the sound of it.
Well, as you can see from this artwork, she is an exceptional artist. And in the woodblock tradition, the first point in the artistic production after the commission and the project, the terms of the project are established by the business owner, the entrepreneur. The first most important point is to produce a painting, a design for the print. And so woodblock artists were painters first and foremost. And when you look at this, maybe her husband was a brilliant artist, but could he have equaled this? I mean, this is an outstanding work.
It certainly is, and the control of light and shade, especially to have that, to capture that, the night in the exterior with that, and having it backlit from the interior, it's beautiful. It's the sort of reminds me of the sort of use of light that you would see in, say, Dutch old masters. Is there is that part of a Western influence, or is it part of the Japanese tradition of painting night scenes like this?
Night scenes are popular in Japanese art, and some of the earliest woodblock prints that we have show night scenes, beautifully controlled night scenes done with minimal colours, minimal inks, and just beautifully sensitive. A number of them showing cherry blossom at night, for example, which is a real trope of Japanese culture and therefore of Japanese art as well. The idea that at night, small sources of light will illuminate something as delicate as a cherry blossom in even more spectacular ways. So night scenes are known in Japanese art and also in Japanese woodblock prints, and we imagine that this might have been a painting for a woodblock print, but we don't have a surviving print from it. But I think what you've pointed to is really important here, and that is that Katsushika Ōi lives in precisely the period in which Japan is opening up to the West more thoroughly after a couple of centuries of isolation. We call this the Meiji Restoration because of the restoration precisely of the imperial ruling class in this period under the Meiji Emperor. So yes, there is suddenly in the middle of the 19th century, there is the possibility for, first of all, Japanese works to leave the country in much greater numbers than they have at this point, until this point in time. But also the opposite is true. So foreign works come into Japan in greater quantities, and artists like Ōi's father, Hokusai, start to encounter things like Prussian blue, for example, and that revolutionizes their technique, but also they're encountering the style of those works. And so when you see, for example, a Dutch influence here, I think chiaroscuro, that balance between light and shade and kind of tonal sensitivities, that's a Western aesthetic that does, I think, underpin this work at the same time as I think it also has a very Japanese aesthetic as well.
And
And you can see that in the kind of that wonderful uh, play of the light on the lattice work. But also, I suppose, maybe part of the Japanese tradition is the use of the lattice as a compositional device.
Yeah, I mean, Japanese aesthetics really prioritize darkness. There's a wonderful work of about a generation after this painting called In Praise of Shadows, where a Japanese philosopher attempts to explain to the West why the Japanese functionally live in such a dark world and why, therefore, their aesthetics really rejoice in darkness, something that, the Western tradition is always seeking to cast light on something, and the Japanese tradition is quite happy for things to be in the dark. So I think that's a very Japanese element of aesthetics here. But this is also an accurate representation of what happened in the Yoshiwara or red light district of Tokyo, or Edo, as it was called at that time. And that is that sex workers were displayed to their prospective public through lattices, through grills. So there's a kind of a functional social dimension here in the fact that we don't get to see these women face on revealed in all of their highly painted, highly decorated glory. That was how they were exhibited for custom in the red light quarter. But also, yes, that revealing and concealing is just very much a function of Japanese aesthetics overall, that what you can't quite see is just as is maybe even more attractive than what you can see very easily. So I'm thinking about geisha, for example, and the way in which the nape of their neck is painted to highlight what you can't see, which is the rest of their back. So, that kind of revealing but concealing at the same time is very much a function of Japanese aesthetics overall.
And it's beautifully done here with the use of the darkness. So as you said, the kind of there's a tradition of chiaroscuro in the West, but that tends to use light to control the composition, whereas this, as you point to, it's the darkness that kind of draws us in from where the viewer would essentially be also in the dark, that moves us into that point in the just to the right of center, from where we get that wonderful glimpse of parts of the sex workers inside. We can only see small bits in some cases. I noticed I can only see a part of their face and not the whole. And that kind of, I think, for me at least, encourages us to keep looking into the work.
I think this work is absolutely, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely designed to keep you looking and looking very closely. It's not a big work at all. I was lucky enough to see it in Tokyo in the Ota Memorial Museum of Art a few years ago. They own this work. They're a woodblock print museum, a collection founded by a magnate who dedicated his spare time to his obsession with woodblock prints. And this work he collected because of the reputation of Katsushika Ōi as a printmaker, but the reality is that it's her paintings that survive rather than any prints made from them. And they don't bring it out very often because paintings such as this in the Japanese tradition are painted with highly perishable materials on highly perishable materials such as paper and silk. And I think when thinking about Ōi painting with inks, that's essentially what she's painting with, not paint as we understand it, not something viscous, but something very loose and runny like ink. When she's painting on something like paper or silk, as we see here, it's extraordinary the amount of control she has over the medium, because these are mediums that bleed, and she uses the bleed in beautiful ways in those pools of light around the lanterns, for example. But then this is a very rigidly geometrical composition, as woodblock prints from paintings such as this often were, even those of her father, for example, Hokusai. So the lattice gives such a structural underpinning to this work, but it also forces you to come in quite close to what is a small work and look beyond the lattice to see what you can make out. I mean, it takes a little while of looking to see the painted screens, for example, on the left. So I think it's absolutely, as woodblock prints often were, and this was presumably a design for one, they were usually designed to be studied at close range for quite a long period of time. So again, concealing from you a lot of what it is that's going to keep you looking and keep you thinking about the mood of an evocative work such as this one.
And that kind of seems to draw the viewer into the sort of looking that the people in the foreground are doing as well, where they kind of, you can get a sense that they're looking in, but you don't get a sense that they have a clear sight either. So like the people painted, we become part of that scene. Are the people who are painted there on the foreground, are they likely to be seeking the services of the women inside, or are they undertaking another pastime?
I think part of what they're doing is what you've said. We've been structured as we look at this work as viewers. We've been built into it as voyeurs in the same way as these people are. So some of these people are voyeurs. They're just there for the joy of looking. Courtesans were very expensively dressed and made up and, impeccable as their kind of cousin workers in the geisha industry were. So people are coming to get a good look at them and at the gorgeous surrounds that they find themselves within. But because it was such an active, lit, licensed red light quarter, one of, from memory, 3 in Edo at this time, and a very big one in Oi's lifetime. There were maybe 9,000 women working in various positions in this relatively small district in what is today's Asakusa neighborhood in Tokyo. There are also people who are here to drink, to gamble, to play games, to look at everyone else parading around. These were licensed quarters of the city that the Tokugawa shoguns encouraged the development of in order to kind of force a merchant and samurai class to spend all of their money in one place and restrict all of their outrageous activities and potentially, socially difficult activities into one part of the city. So it wasn't just a red light district, it was also generally an entertainment quarter, and that's how it more or less survives in Asakusa today. There's both a fun park, quite literally an amusement park, adjacent to where the Yoshiwara district was in present-day Tokyo, but there are also still many soaplands. That's a euphemism for brothels in Tokyo today. So it's even today it retains somewhat of that same kind of tenor.
And is much of that, for people who are less familiar with Tokyo, is much of that area of the city intact today?
No, almost nothing. So Yoshiwara was reputed to be the most beautiful district in Tokyo. We think of red light districts as somewhat seedy, but because of the gorgeousness of the women doing their trade here, this had a reputation for being a very beautiful neighborhood in the city. But it burned down in the middle of the 17th century and was rebuilt bigger and better. In Oi's own time, we see how it is here, but then it was destroyed again by fire and then knocked to the ground by the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. So no, nothing of this neighbourhood is retained, but the philosophy of it is retained in part.
And just, I suppose, a final thought, just thinking about Oi and her familiarity with the region of the city or the activities that are being undertaken here, because it seems to be painted entirely without judgment. There's no kind of the viewers don't have that kind of like that leery voyeuristic face that you would expect, say, in a Western painting, for example. When people are going to this district for diverse forms of entertainment, would that also include women, or is it kind of a male-only client area?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can see some women looking in from the outside in this scene. No, people would go there in couples, for example. People would go to have a look at what was happening in the district. The district was known for some important processions and festivals that were really colourful, vibrant parts of Edo's social life, and people would go along to have a look at those as well. So although it's quite literally a red light district, in the sense of being a licensed place for sex work, it's more fair, I think, to describe it as an entertainment quarter, because that's how people understood it in the time. There was a moralistic judgment on sex work in a way that is akin to Western ideas, but it was more based on ideas of social status and hierarchy than on any kind of religious judgment, as underpins it in a more traditional kind of Judeo-Christian framework. So yes, there was not the same kind of moral judgment of this work, but there was something of an element of prurience to it. So people went along to have a bit of a look and see what it was like. So maybe in that sense, a little bit like a kind of an Amsterdam red light district. idea is at work here, but also it was simply a very physically beautiful place to be in the city, and a place where you could enjoy all sorts of types of entertainment.
Well, thank you again, Kathleen, and we look forward to hearing you on a future episode as well.
Thanks, Mick.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.